Hello there, and welcome to Weekend's Web App. Today is day 21, and we sort of passed a milestone last time in terms of where we were at. We we wrote a whole bunch of tests. We did 3 days worth of writing tests to cover over all our layer, and you can see that all down here. And now we're in this position where we need to figure out what else to do. And I didn't. You'll notice that we have a bunch of tests broken for the route matcher, and that's because what I really want to work on now is I want to look in the direction of uh, routing this renderer and getting this all in a position where we can actually start to lay down some code for the real app itself. So that's what we're going to be looking into today. I'm not sure how much code we'll do today because I want to spend a little time whiteboarding, but if you want to keep up with today's code, you'll need to use git checkout and then check out day 20. That's where we finished last time. Anyway, let's bring up the blackboard, whiteboard, whatever you want to call it. And I'll just make sure everything's working here. Sweet. All right. So we're on day 21, and our concern of now is our renderer, which has a little bit of it also interfaces a little bit with our router. So we'll involve that in the shape of things. Now, if you remember, when we set up the router, we had a few things going on here. So we set it up so that we could have more than one page at one time. So that we'll say this is the old page, and that hangs around while we're getting all the bits and pieces we need for this new page. And then when it's ready, as soon as it's ready, then we know that we can get rid of the old page. Okay, so at the moment our system, as it were, only cares about the view, this sort of section here. Well, most of the time when you've got an app, you've got a few more things to put all that together. And I mean, I'm not suggesting you go out and do it straight away, but there is some good material regarding this sort of architecture model in Google's Web Fundamentals, talking about an application shell. And that's sort of what we're going to be building here, is this concept of an application shell. So that every time we load the app, we can render certain things in their desired spots. So when we talk about an application shell, usually what happens inside of it is we'll have a view, but then we'll also have what I tend to call Chrome, or shell elements. I mean, I usually call them Chrome. And the reason I call them Chrome is because they're the bits that live around your views, and they're the bits that sort of stick around. So if you had a sort of a standard desktop app, on the page you might have let's say you have up on the top you have this persistent bar, right? And this might have, say, your logo for the brand, and maybe you have a little picture, a profile picture up here, and then maybe you have like some menu entries here. Now, I would call that part of the Chrome, right? But most apps usually have a little more Chrome than just that. They might have some support down here. A lot of people use Intercom these days, but I mean, people also roll their own sort of thing. Now, if that's something that sits around on every single page, then that is also Chrome. And say perhaps there is a thing that comes in situationally based on certain views that you're looking at, but it does persist from page to page. That could be Chrome as well. And depending on your setup, there might be more and more. Like say, certain apps might have sort of like that was not so great. Might have a sidebar that pops in every time, so it comes in, and maybe you can toggle it on and off, and it might show different things depending on where you are. It might be a line of comments or something like that. So again, you've got more Chrome. And then you've got your view container. And that's sort of the main thing, like the main content there. And this is controlled by a URL usually. So whatever your URL is, usually it's usually it's what determines what view you have. And you'll have views that come in and out, just like this situation we were talking about here. So views will come in and they'll come out and they'll transfer as they roll in. So you'll need this sort of reusable space that you'll keep on bringing things into and out of. And then you have these persistent spaces that sort of live on throughout the entire app. Now, in terms of architecture, I guess, see, there are a few ways you can do it. Now, if you remember, we have our concept of in-memory storage. And our in-memory storage will hopefully have a lot of information in it. So it will have all sorts of things like the current user, possibly like you have current user, recently fetched data. So you keep it around in memory so that you don't have to fetch the data again. Let's see, what else? So possibly some global UI state, like is the sidebar activated? So this sidebar that we're talking about up here, maybe like is this sidebar activated? Might be some sort of thing, like let's call it a history sidebar for now, just that like it's something, right? Okay, so you got this, and also you've got the route, the current route, and that's used to sort of tell the renderer what to view in. So this memory storage is what is used to render all these bits and pieces, right? So if we think about our discrete components now, we've got the sidebar, we've got this little support bar here, and then we've got the views, which will live in this container, and potentially there will be, during a transition, there might actually be two of them at any one time. But usually there'll only be one, you know? So there'll be a transitioning one, and then there'll be the focus one. Alright, so this data needs to essentially be fed to each one of these places to tell it what to look like. And there's some other things to keep in mind as well. If we have a set of breadcrumbs up here, say, and for those who aren't aware with the lingo, I'm sure most people who have made it this far through the series will know, but breadcrumbs are simply your stack of pages that you've gone to. So you've got home, and then you've got project name, and then you've got item name, some item within a project, right? These would be breadcrumbs, right? Now, the thing is if you've got this separation of logic, you've got this Chrome and you've got this view, and these aren't actually talking to each other necessarily, right? However, it's kind of important that you do have some ability for this data, this, to talk to this. Because who do you want in charge? Do you want the logic for the breadcrumbs to all exist in one place? Well, there might be an argument that perhaps you do, but there also might be an argument that this view, you want to sort of keep all the information about what kind of things this needs out here. So, for instance, it would say, all right, I have these breadcrumbs. Oop, that was pretty shocking, but anyway, it would say, I have these breadcrumbs. Maybe there's a little action bar here. It's like my menu has 4 choices, and it goes through what those choices are, provides them to the Chrome. Like a view needs to be able to declare what it's got in it, so, or what it needs out of all of that Chrome. So typically, the orientation that I've sort of settled on these days is all of these things grab things from this global data, and then the view layer is the view containers, these views we'll call them, each of them also sort of broadcast a Chrome state, or and the Chrome state might have something like it'll have breadcrumbs and menus and all this sort of thing. So that's sort of this concept of, okay, what is a Chrome state? Like it broadcasts Chrome states from the view, and that way you've got some way of knowing, all right, like these are all the things that should be taking place during this when this component exists, and that way you can start to what's the best way to say this? You can start to have this sort of view centric sort of setup. You can keep these isolated, and then they just sort of listen to certain bits of the global state when they pass around. I think potentially a better way to approach this is to start laying down some code than talk too heavily about this. But I guess we're going to treat the view as the center of the world, and then eventually they're going to be sending messages to these bits of Chrome to tell them, hey, I want you to show certain things for whatever reason. And as we iterate through this, we'll start to hopefully see a bit more information in terms of how our whole app is going to come together. Now, keep in mind, each of these sections, like once these sections are being rendered, we'll start off by just rendering them with HTML, and then eventually we'll have to pick up something that's a little more heavy duty. And there are a bunch of frameworks out there for the view layer, such as React, Vue, if we want to reach back a bit further, stuff like Angular, although Angular is more of a whole set framework. Because I'm most familiar with it, I'll probably be using React. But part of the way we architect this is intentionally going to be so that if we change our mind or want to work with something a bit different, we always have that opportunity. And that's part of the reason why, even though it takes slightly more time to get up and running with a an environment without frameworks, I kind of dig it, because it means that I've at least got some level of choice going forward. Because unfortunately, in front end, hitching your entire what's the word I'm looking for? Hitching all of your progress to a particular framework or whatever in an industry where the new hot thing seems to be out every month, every 2 months, and you seem to be ancient just because you're using year-old tech. It doesn't pay to be overly invested in a particular platform, as long as you can avoid sort of coupling everything, and that way you can sort of move forward on new technology at your own pace. But anyway, let's jump into the render tech, and we'll start to actually investigate how all this is going to come together. So I've already got the server running. So let's have a crack, jump into what we have, and start to have a look around. I'm just going to get rid of that for now. So if we remind ourselves what we have this container with this title here. It's just sort of sitting around, hanging around. And then we can start to move around through all the pages. So the main thing that forms our page right now, oops, I pressed the wrong button. The main thing that forms our page right now is this main view. So inside of it, it renders certain things. And when I go to a different view, it renders a new thing. Inside this div here. And other than that, you can see this counter and this H1 up here. And you could potentially make the argument that these are Chrome. They're not Chrome that is handled by the JavaScript at all. The JavaScript doesn't, well, the JavaScript does touch this, but in a really haphazard way. And what we want to get to a point, the point we want to get to is where we have a little more control over all of these things, and we can start to reason about them in isolation. Because right now, even though this is, one would say, an arguably simple application, there's a lot more code going in this on this main page than you really want there to be. So let's have a look at all of the things that sort of initialize this. So we have this concept of initializing data. So here's where all the work sort of happens. And then we have this initialize data function down here just to get our database up and running. And if we look through and we see down here, you've got the Chrome being sort of controlled here. You can see this count element the subscription to the store, so that's no good. We sort of need to figure out how to handle that Chrome. And then we've also got down here inside inside the router and the renderer. So the renderer is the one that manages, rendering all these bits and pieces, and the router is the one that tells the renderer what to render based on which URL we're on. And what we want to do is we want to get to a point where we can now sort of initialize these two and then expect everything to go through there. So what we're going to do, just to start off with, is we're going to extinguish the concept of our footer and then start to work with our container. Now let's have a look at what we've got here. So we've got head, we've got body, and then inside here we've got our base concept for a page. Now what we could do to start off with is set up our containers that we would consider where our shell would go, and then that way we can sort of pre-render what's going to go into them normally. So let's say we consider this our navigation Chrome, right? So I'll give it an ID of nav so that we can sort of target it properly, and inside it's literally just going to be this text of Weekends web app. Okay, and then we're going to grab this footer as well, and we're going to keep it with the name of counter. And what we want to try and do is get to this point where this will actually get rendered by JavaScript in its entirety. And in order to do that, what we kind of need to do is we need to get to this point where we're not what's the best way of saying this? We need to get to this point where we're not relying on things being in existence. Like our app needs to be able to sort of pull them all together and put them in place as it needs be. And we need some sort of a common way to hook all of these together. Because you remember, we have this concept of adding a route, and that's cool, right? But we want to be able to sort of do it in a slightly less verbose way and not have to remember all the little details about how the routing comes together, how this preload function comes together. We want to be able to build sort of unique, sort of discrete components that can do all this stuff. So maybe what I'm going to do is jump into I think we'll start off with figuring out how to give more Chrome to this renderer and see if it can do render this footer for us. So what we're going to do is open up, let me just have a little think about where I'm going to put stuff. So inside our client folder, we don't have a UI folder yet, and I'm going to make that change now. And I'm going to create a folder called Chrome, and I'm going to come up with this concept that will allow us to hopefully render this this footer Chrome repeatedly. And so if I go to say if I jump into client /UI/Chrome, and we'll call it footer. Well, let's call it counter, because that's literally what it's going to do, right? And we won't even go for the React stuff or anything like that. Bit of muscle memory took over there. What we're going to do is we're going to try and make it so that we can express this footer counter in that place, right? So if we take a look back at index.pug, we've got this counter living here. Now, we would need some sort of code to sort of potentially initialize this, but that's sort of, let's think about those steps, right? So whenever you start rendering, you're going to put something in that place, right? So to initialize, if you had a container of some description, have some sort of HTML element, and let's just say we just chuck it in there. Like, we assume that we can take this container element and just make its inner HTML match what we want it to match, right? So So it would have inside it a span with a class of count. And it would start at 0. It also has this button, which is called increment, and it says on it increment as well. And we have one called decrement as well. And while you might argue this is duplication, eventually what we would want to do is actually rely on this function to also do this one. So we can render it both on the client side, but also on the server side, so that we could do some sort of pre-rendering for users. Anyway, that would initialize this sort of concept, right? Now, what else do we need to do? We need to also add our handlers, right? So like these listening buttons, these counter buttons, all that sort of thing. That needs to be worked with, right? So let's say, so we're already assuming that we need to have something available to us, and that something is the Weekends web app context. And we will eventually need to talk about the state and the actions as well. So let's just get the whole lot while we're at it, right? Where are we looking? App state. There we go. Okay. So let's say we have this all available to us. Like when we initialize a thing, we have the state available to us. We have the actions. And we have the context. Happy days. Now, we can already do some interesting stuff with this, right? We could already do stuff like take the state, grab the counter, and do the count. So when it initializes properly. But we also need to add these listeners here, and we could do that. We could isolate that. We could say, all right, from this container, once we've added the inner HTML, we can get those things. And then we can add our button handlers. Did I not do that here? Well, if those handlers are missing, then I can just grab them and make use of them. So if we go increment button dot add event listener, and then be on click. So we've got actions dot counter dot increment count. So we got that one, and we've got, I must have deleted the other one, that's why I lost it. Anyway, and we've got a decrement button. So theoretically, this is all we need to sort of initialize this particular component. And we can, how about we try it out, and we'll just see what happens. And unfortunately this subscribe, we're going to ignore this subscription just for now. And instead we're going to do something, we're not even going to jump into the renderer yet. And we're going to see if this would work in a sort of, in a conceptual manner. So I'm just going to do an import here and grab initialize as initialize footer. And we're going to grab that from UI Chrome counter. Sure it does. Did I type it incorrectly? Oh, I didn't export it. That's what I didn't do. Good stuff. Okay. So let's just start off with something like this, where we'll grab the footer container, which is, if I wanted to get it, I can do document.get element by ID, and I can grab counter. And I'm just going to essentially throw footer container into the initialize function. So initialize footer. What am I doing next? Initialize footer. and then state. Where does state come from? So we'll do store.getState, and that will provide it the correct state. We will grab actions, which comes from our actions bundle. And then, well, that comes from our context as well. So what we might do is just pass it the context, and that way we can get away with removing this and go context actions. And yeah, it's a bit verbose, but I mean, we could do an assignment if we ever wanted to save on that. Alright, so here's a first stab at this particular idea, and hopefully it doesn't go down in flames. Alright, so we have the button there, and if we click it, we do have some activity. You can see that up here, but we don't have any activity down here, and the reason for that is because we do not have an update method. Something that updates this this container, right? Well, let's say we wanted to. Well, how about we bring back our store.subscribe, but instead of having to know about the footer here, know about how this footer works or anything like that, how about we give ourselves a update function, which again takes the container, the state, and the context. And we can sort of do just that. We could say, we could just make use of that directly. So let me just, I feel like this is, here we go. Just confusing myself. All right. So if we now grab that update function as update footer, we get rid of these two. So we've got the footer container and our update footer here, and we can just get, oh, we've already got the state. We can remove that line there, and now it's a little bit briefer. And now we've got this update function, and we'll just check. I don't know why I chose that. It's just random text. And you can see that picking up right there. Okay, and it actually picked up with all the various renders as well. So happy days. So what do we want to do? We want to update this count. Now the code was there, but we may as well just rewrite it. So we should be able to get the const counter equals container dot get element. I can do query selector, and we'll just get dot count, which is this span here, and then we should be able to just update the counter with the text content of said counter with state dot counter dot count. Number is not assignable to string. Right, of course. Fix that, and we are done. Now, if we take that, we can now see that this simple concept is now updating. Happy days, right? So we've got potentially everything we need to render some sort of Chrome, but maybe we want to keep all of this. So rather than doing our own subscribe loop, we want to make the renderer responsible for this. Well, you would remember with state how we created this concept of state bundles. So with name, a reducer, initial, and action. Well, maybe we can do a Chrome bundle, right? So the concept of a Chrome bundle, and let's jump into the renderer index and talk about this. So let's go and export an interface called a Chrome bundle. And it's going to care about state and context. So that state and that context are based on the fact that these functions inside are going to be dependent on that, right? So it's going to have an initialize function, gets it ready, gets it doing whatever it needs to do. So we can call that a function that takes a container. So it needs to have an HTML element. So container, HTML element, and it needs to have the state, and it needs to have the context. What am I doing here? Oh yes. And what does it do in response to that? Is it based on some sort of promise? Do we have to wait for it to load? Or do we just do the stupid thing for now and just have it return null? Like, it literally doesn't matter what comes back, right? Let's go with that. Then the next one is an update function. Again, we've got a container, we've got a state, and we've got a context. And potentially, we can eventually catch errors coming out of this system. But for now, this will do, right? So, yeah, we've got this initialize and then this update function. And that's maybe enough to start to bundle this into the renderer, right? So let's go and grab that context from the renderer. So we'll import Chrome bundle. Yeah, we'll import Chrome bundle from the platform, and then renderer, and then the index file. We don't need another line for that as well. So rather than exporting these functions directly, I mean, we could do that, but I'd rather not. Instead, we're going to match the sort of the way we're doing the state bundles. And I'm just going to check that out because I'm getting old. Not that old, but old enough to forget things at random. So we want to look at this concept of a state bundle and try and do the same thing. So you can see here, we've got this routing state shape and this routing action shape. And unlike other things, I don't really need to talk too much about how it all comes together. Yeah, unlike the other one. So you can see here where it declares exactly what the state of it is. So we're going to do pretty much the same thing here, where we're going to go. So we're going to export a constant called Chrome bundle. We could call it the footer bundle or something like that if we wanted to be more explicit, but let's just do that for now. And it returns a weekends web app state and weekends web app context, because that's what it depends on. Okay, and I missed a few things, so I need to put those in them. So I need to put in the update and the initialize function. And am I missing anything else? Or have I got my types wrong? Container, state, and context, that's what this depends on. And I'm not sure why it doesn't like it. Wonder if I change these to void, whether they'll play ball. There we go. Yeah. So void means no return. Otherwise, if I have it as a type of null, it has to be a return of null. There might be some more to that information though eventually, because we might have this as such a thing where we actually want it to feed into itself. So like it returns information that can be used to be rendered on the next one. For instance, maybe it has to save some information so that it's more efficient every time it goes through. But we can play with that down the track. For now, I'm happy with this. I'm just gonna give these a new line so it doesn't get all the. It's not like it's really obscuring anything, so that's fine. Okay, we've got this Chrome bundle. Now, what could we do with this Chrome bundle? Well, let's say we provided this Chrome bundle to the renderer, and it could then do stuff. It could render these bits and pieces, right? So let's say we get a series of Chrome bundles, and they have an A, C, what type do they have? Yes, they have S and they have C, because C is the context. So they have those types there, and there's an array of them, right? Now this is going to break certain bits and pieces because we're not actually providing these anymore. But let's see if we can pass that information in. So instead of doing this little number here, what we're going to do instead, I'll just comment that for now. Instead of that little number, what we're going to do instead is we're going to export our state bundle. And I probably want to be able to name this stuff, right? So if I just jump quickly back to counter.ts, that's not there. Counter.ts. I'll have a look at what I did for state bundle regarding default and stuff like that. State.ts. Default is state bundle. Yes, so I did export that by default, so I will export by default the Chrome bundle as well. Okay, so that's our default export. So now we can go footer bundle, or we'll call it footer Chrome. And we will chuck it into this this list of Chrome, right? So we'll make a list now. We'll call it Chrome Chrome bundles. Routing state shape, any action. Huh. That's funny that. It doesn't like it. I wonder if it would like it if I gave it to it directly. Maybe that would convince it. It still doesn't like it. Yeah, I just want to deal with these types real quick. Extends store routing state shape. Okay, that's kind of correct. Oh, it gets the whole store. And I'm not giving it the whole store. Okay. So I actually need something that's more permissive than that. Yeah, more permissive than that. Because see here, this is like S is the store. But really what we want is the concept of state to persist, right? And we don't actually have the concept of state in here. We'd possibly have to fix that. And I'm just going to satisfy myself with using any for now. But maybe we can tighten up those types eventually. Well, if that's the case, and that works, then this should work too. And it does, right? So now we have these Chrome bundles. And we can take a look in and, check that we've actually got the Chrome bundles here. The ones we want anyway. And here we go. So we've got this initialize and update right here in this console log. Okay. So we've got our Chrome bundles. Now we've got to do something with them. And we've got all this concept of like all this sort of state hanging around. And we've actually got some information missing for our bundles as well, because you'll notice that it doesn't actually know, like we have no information with which to know which container element we need to get. So potentially we need to fix that, right? We can go jump over to Chrome bundle. Actually, we'll change the concept of a Chrome bundle, right? So we'll just have some way to get a container, and like we could make this super generic. We could go, okay, get container, and then allow you to put a function in, or I could just make it really easy and just say, all right, the container is going to be a string, and I'm going to do that one. I'm going to do the container is expected to be a string, so we'll go container ID. And it's got to be a string. It's got to be provided with the Chrome bundles. Once we do that, that's going to break the types for this here. Oh wait, I made a mistake. So now that we've done that, this technically should be broken, but the TypeScript isn't complaining about it. Yeah, no, it's complaining about it back here, but it's not complaining about it in here. So we need to fix that. We need to go into the Chrome. Oh yeah, and you can see the complaint here. So container ID, and we're going to call that counter, is it? Let me check. Counter. Alright, IDs are good stuff at this high level. I like them. Obviously, we won't be using them too heavily, but they're fine. They're fine. They're going to help us out, do our work. So now that we've got our container ID in place, now we've potentially got something with which to initialize all these views with, right? So let's again think of a dumb way to do this before we think of a smart way to do it. So if we iterate over all these Chrome bundles, so for each of them, so we've got a CB, we'll call it CB, which is a Chrome bundle in this case. And what we want to do is we want to get our, we want to find our main item. Now, I'm wondering where is the view element? Okay, yeah, so we've got view element, and that's sort of meant to be where the views go, if I remember properly. Yeah, let's get this guy right here, okay? So what we want to do instead of that is we want to go and fetch our items as we need to. And we can't do it from the scope of the view element because that's not quite high enough, because if we did a get element by ID, this would not be able to see this, okay? Like when you do get element by ID in a scope, that might not actually be true, but because get element by ID is meant to be super optimized and go grab the thing that you need super quick. But either way, we'll do it from document. So let's go container element, and we'll go document.get element by ID, and we'll grab it from cb.container ID. And once we've got that container element, we should be able to pretty much run this code down here verbatim, right? So we'll grab the initial state so that we're not constantly grabbing it. Go store.getState. And now instead of initialize footer and all of this sort of stuff, and even the store subscribe, we'll get rid of that. We'll actually do that somewhere else. So we're looking at taking the CB bundle and going initialize. We'll grab the container element, and we'll set it up with the initial state. So now we've got this initialization happening over here, and it's important if we, nothing works at the moment. How about now? No, nothing's working. Let me just get it working, and no, so we have the button that's iterated a few times, and theoretically this should update based on that, which it doesn't. So something is not quite right at the present moment. So let's investigate what that something is. We'll get rid of this fetch of the footer container, and we'll get rid of all of this in general. Okay. You can see here the footer counter. Alright, so we're up to 4. Now, does this use the persistent key storage? No, it doesn't at the moment. Okay, so I turned that off. Okay. Well, maybe it's not working as we intended to. That's more likely right now, because I don't think we can actually, we never actually made it so you could update that, maybe? Let me see that. This is why we write tests, hey? So, initial counter. Oh, that's right. That's right. We don't actually, like, it was part of, like, if we go back, we update it here. So we possibly need to keep this around. So that's my old code that I just took a peek at. What we might do is, just for the sake of keeping old functionality in place, we're going to do something like this. Just to keep that fact that it saves around. I mean, we could do that somewhere else eventually, but for now, let's do that. Okay, so if I reload now, do some bumps up, and now you'll see it keeps updated. So you can see that 6 there. like it rendered, that saved value kept updated. Well, so we've got the initialization, but we don't have the update as we click, right? Because you can see the update's happening here, but you don't see an update happening here down at the 6. So that's the next thing we need to handle, is that Chrome updating as we step through. So every time we get the state, we're going to go through all of that Chrome and re-render it. And we're going to render it after the views, so that the views, if they have an opinion about how things should look, can go ahead and do it, right? So here you've got an update for all active views, and we're going to take it as okay, we can not only do that, we can also do an update on the Chrome bundle. So let's sneak this little section here down to the bottom. We'll copy paste it down. Oopsie daisy. Okay. So we'll still get the container element. We'll eventually do something with a little bit more permanence than this. And instead of running initialize, we're going to run update. And instead of using initial state, we're going to use app state, because that's the current app state. And there we go. So now you can see it is updating as we go. So every time it initializes, it does its thing up here, and then initializes straight away, loads the view, and then afterwards, once we have views, then it always renders after views. Okay, so that's a start. Now, we've done this for the footer, we haven't done this for the header. Let's consider this nav element and put it in our Chrome, right? So if we go to counter.ts, we're going to replicate this and then create a new header space. So we'll go client UI Chrome, and then we will go header.ts. Oh, we'll call it nav. We'll call it nav. That's fine. Okay, and this time don't have a lot to put in it. We just put our weekends web app nav, and I'll just make it clear that it's something different by giving it an extra word in there so that it does actually change. We're not going to actually bind any handlers here, and really the update function is going to do sod all. So now we just give it the ID of nav. We have ourselves a Chrome bundle for the header. Good stuff. Okay, let's hook that up into app.ts. So now we need to grab that as well. So let's grab the nav Chrome, chuck it into our list down here, and now we've got ourselves that rendering as well. Good stuff. Now we've got another 10 minutes, and I don't want to dive into the views just yet. But let's think about some things that are potentially a source of inefficiency here. This re-renders every single time, and maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to only re-render if the state of this, if the value has actually changed. Now, I mean, obviously this isn't an expansive operation, but eventually it might be, right? And maybe in the initialization phase, there is some things that we still need to access. Like maybe we created something, or in frameworks and whatnot, you're returned with an element that you sort of need to hang around in order to do quick updates to it. Well, if that's the case, then you do need some sort of state persisting from one section to the next. And what we could do is sort of create some sort of concept of a Chrome state, right? So if we were to go back to our renderer, and we'll call this, we don't even need to call it anything because we don't even define it. but essentially it's a render unit state. And if the initialize function and the update function returned it, then maybe we could pass it back this render unit state every time, right? So if we were to say think about sort of our Chrome states, maybe maybe we could hold on to them, right? We could call it some sort of like a key value store, right? So we'll grab a key string and then it will just sort of have anything attached to it. And that's the thing that's going to be passed around and round and round. So let's say, for instance, that we did not want to regrab this, right? We did not want to regrab this counter. So let's say we have our export interface. We don't even need to export it actually. We can just create an interface called counter state. And inside it, what we're going to do is we're going to keep the counter lm. And we're also going to keep the last counter, last count in a number, right? And then here, so we've got this idea of like things that we can pass, and we could even make the render unit state void, and that would be acceptable, right? So just to make that clear, you can see that that made the type system happy. But what if we were to make it the counter? So what do we call it? Counter state. We'll call it counter Chrome state, just to be real clear. Good stuff. Okay, and now it's complaining because the functions don't actually deal with counter Chrome state. So that's our next sort of thing that we want to deal with. And we also need we need to deal with it here as well. So we need this concept of a render unit state inside the function definition. And I'm just going to break this out a bit, just for the sake of legibility. Whoopsie daisy. All right, and then new line there. Okay. So if we take this RU state, this is gonna again not be a big fan. And you know what? I might actually turn that around, because if I put it at the end, it means it's optional. Because I mean, for some things it might not actually care, right? And that way I can do just that. I can make it optional. And that way, if the render unit state is void, then it's fine, right? I could still get away with it at this point. And I'll just demonstrate that by changing this back to void again. You can see, all good, right? But this time we want to make use of it, right? And so we're going to have this render unit state, or just do CC state, which is the type of counter Chrome state. It does something with it. And what we want to do is, instead of doing that, instead of making use of that, we're going to go cc state dot counter lm dot text content. And then the other thing we're going to do is just a little bit of an efficiency gain by going, well, barely an efficiency gain, but anyway, if cc state dot last count does not equal cc state, not cc state, but rather state.counter.count. So it only runs that particular statement. And let's just imagine that there's like, something that takes ages in there, or it's like a high computation thing. That might be something that's desirable. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, and then after that, we can update the cc state here. So we'll update the last count with state.counter.count, and then we always return the cc state. All right, all good. Now, in here we need to return some sort of state as well. We need to create a state. So here we need to make sure that we get that counter element, and we can do that here. And then we also need to get the last count, which is going to be, well, the initial count. And I'm not sure what's actually missing now, because this is of the right type. Got a HTML element and a number. So I'm not sure what it doesn't like about it, unless I've messed something up with the types just here. So we've got render unit state and render unit state, which is counter Chrome state. And that seems to be being obeyed, but let's just, we'll get more of the type error if we look in here. So counter LM element. Oh, okay, it defaults to element. Yes, okay. All right, we'll just call it element. You're done. Right. Speaking of that in mind, I believe this would actually be a safe typing as well. Because yeah, HTML element is, yeah, descended from it. So HTML element is actually this element up here. So I should stop doing that. All right, element, good stuff. So now that we've done that, we've got ourselves a concept of this recurring state, right? And hopefully we can see we'll go else skipped updating counter. You can see that here. Now, you'll probably find that this will break first. Why? Because it didn't even show the error. I wonder why not. Well, I can tell you pretty certainly that there is an error here. So it gets into here, and then it will have crashed there. And the reason it crashed is because it tried to render without, it would try to access CC state without there actually being a CC state provided to it. So we need to do something about that, right? And what we probably need to do is initialize ourselves a renderer state. So what do we call that? Well, we just grab the type of renderer state, and we'll have Chrome states. We'll just immortalize them, hey? Very good. Now, each time we do this, we need to assign the Chrome state, right? So we'll do this by the container ID. So if we grab our Chrome states and just assign the cb.containerid to it. Oh wait, renderer state. It's getting a bit of a mouthful really, but I'm fine with that. I'm not going to be touching this code too much once I've got it bulletproof, so I'm fine with a bit of verbosity in this particular environment. So here it's going to pick up the renderer state and put it in place. And just to demonstrate that fact, we'll take a look at our renderer state here. Oh, that's an array. We need to fix that. Turn it into an object. That's better. Okay. So you can see here, nav remained undefined because it didn't actually return anything. Void would be fine too. And here you've got this counter element, and the last count, okay? So that seemed to initialize correctly, and it then just crashed through. And it'll be nice to know why that crashed and possibly pick it up properly. But for now, we're gonna cruise on down this way. And instead, we're going to make use of this render state. So we're still going to update the renderer state because it might be updated after each function call, and that's fine. We're going to do something like this, but instead of calling initialize, we're going to do update, And we're also going to grab the Chrome state directly by going Chrome states, or actually we'll do the long function, long call. There we go. So now we've got the Chrome state going in there. So we've got container element, initial state, context, and then a renderer state, Chrome states, container ID. And that should keep on feeding this around in a circular motion. And hopefully not crash, which didn't, you can see there. But we can see a problem, right? For some reason it's not updating, and for some reason it's skipping the update counter every single time. So we need to know why that is. So let's check this. We'll go cc state.lastCount and then state.counter.count. Let's see what's going on, hey? So you can see here 25, 25, so of course it would skip. And of course I made a mistake. You can see here, because Redux doesn't change the old state, it never changed the old state. We would keep on feeding it the initial state. So now we should be in a position where it does in fact skip the render. So you can see updating, decrementing, and that's all cool, but it skipped the update counter 41 times when all of that stuff came in from the database. So we're looking good on that count. So that gives us a sort of a Chrome portion to our renderer. And note that we could put any framework in this, because all we're doing is initializing with our HTML, with some sort of HTML element. And then once we've got that, or DOM element, I should say, I should get in the habit of saying DOM element instead. It's better for description purposes. If we put in if we grab that DOM element and we can keep it around, then we can just keep on circling with any framework we want. Even Elm would fit in this environment potentially. But that gives us the freedom to choose what we want, or even choose something as lightweight as just rendering the HTML directly, which is kind of what we want. So that sort of puts us through our Chrome state bundles. If there are any questions, chuck them in chat or wherever, and I will attempt to answer them while I wrap this up. Now, while I do this, I'll do this commit, and I'll sort of explain what sort of position we put ourselves in. So we made a place for us to put our Chrome, and potentially, keep on re-rendering it, render the whole app as a whole. And we also made it a bit nicer for us to work with our code. So if you look at the concept of Chrome on its own, you've got these little bundles, that have their logic, their corresponding logic, 50 lines or whatever, and they sort of live on their own, and then you assemble them when it comes time to put your app together. You grab your Chrome bundles, okay? So you can probably see where we're going with this. We could potentially do something similar for our routes. We could create view bundles or route bundles, whatever you want to do. And, view bundles will be pretty much identical, only they have to have a teardown or a destroy functionality as well. But they also need the preload. So they need the preload, they need the initialize, they need the update, and then the destroy, the teardown, whatever it is to get rid of that view. But with all of those things in place, then we would have more than enough flexibility to build on whatever view framework we want to, and have it keep on ticking along and live within this renderer shell. And what we will also investigate is the idea of maybe making it so that these views can render after some sort of a delay. Like, what if we what if we load the JavaScript for a particular view later, right? We could split our code such that we could have it load up real fast, right? And then there's just parts of the app that just never get pulled into memory until they absolutely need to. And that's what this bundle concept is hopefully going to buy this down the track. Anyway, that's probably enough. Just make my commit. So what are we on? Day 21. So what do? We expand renderer to handle the concept of persistent Chrome. Using Chrome Chrome bundle interface with support for persistent state for bundles. State across updates. That'll do. Okay. Alrighty. So I'll tag that as well with day 21. Push it all off and then push off the tags. And that'll call it for today. So if you're interested in following along at home, as per usual, you'll find all the code at github.com/weareoffsider/weekendswebapp. We will be getting back into things tomorrow, where I will carry on with expanding this bundling concept over to the views, and we'll just see where we get to. We might get it all done tomorrow, we might not, depending on how much information we need there. Once we've explored those processes, we'll probably go through and actually write our tests for our routing, because remember, there is a big hole in our tests coverage for that one there, which we need to close up, because we want this stuff to be bulletproof, right? And we also want to know that its error handling is going to catch when we make mistakes throughout our initial dev. So you do remember that we had that issue where inside the renderer scope, if the renderer blew up for some reason, that error didn't get caught. We need to deal with that in some way, shape or form. And potentially it might be interesting to try and isolate that error to that bit of Chrome, so it doesn't actually stop the rest of the app from breaking entirely. But we'll see how we go. All right, that is pretty much it from me. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.